Assalamu alaikum and welcome to The Report with me, Yasmin Khatun. British MPs have voted to take the country to war in Iraq again. The vote was passed with a majority of 481 votes. It means British jets could be involved in US-led airstrikes on the Islamic State group within hours. Our correspondent Sadia Chowdhury has spent the day in Westminster.
The exact extent of British involvement hasn't yet been made clear, and the Defence Secretary Michael Fallon has said that it could be a long-haul one set to last, quote, 2 to 3 years. The Tories, the Liberal Democrats and Labour have all backed action, and the coalition says it is legal because it comes as a direct result of a request made by the Iraqi government.
Left unchecked, we will face a terrorist caliphate on the shores of the Mediterranean and bordering a NATO member with a declared and proven determination to attack our country and our people. This is not the stuff of fantasy. It is happening in front of us, and we need to face up to it.
It came as little surprise. As Parliament reconvened for a special session this afternoon, it was expected that the Prime Minister would win approval to join US-led airstrikes on Islamic State fighters in Iraq. Until now, David Cameron has held back from joining the action after suffering a humiliating defeat last year when lawmakers rejected British airstrikes against Syrian government forces. But a coalition, including the United States and Middle Eastern allies such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, has already started bombing Islamic State targets both in Iraq and Syria. France, which had initially said it wouldn't take part, has also struck IS hangars in Iraq, although so far not in Syria. The Islamic State group, which has captured large swathes of territory across the region, poses a threat to Britain's security. That's according to the Prime Minister. David Cameron says Britain cannot ignore these threats. Last night, anti-war campaigners gathered outside Downing Street to protest against Britain's involvement.
Innocent civilians will get killed, just like what's just happened in Gaza. Children, the infrastructure gets destroyed, hospitals, schools, that never helps anybody. It creates another generation of people who hate the West.
The protest was by no means comparable in size to those seen in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And outside Parliament this morning, commuters spoke in favour of Britain joining the airstrikes.
The suffering in the Middle East of the local people will only get worse if we stand back and do nothing.
I think it's probably the only way that we can actually flush the guys out, and that's about it.
Yeah, definitely the right thing to do. Well, if we don't, then we're just to target ourselves, aren't we?
David Cameron has ruled out sending British ground troops to fight and has made clear that Britain's involvement is conditional on the Iraqi government asking for help, which it did on Wednesday when the Prime Minister met his Iraqi counterpart, Haider al-Abadi. Mr Cameron also stressed the importance of involvement by regional powers in an effort to avoid the perception of a Western assault against Islam, something that could be used as a propaganda tool to recruit insurgents. Around 500 British citizens are thought to have travelled to fight in Syria and northern Iraq, raising fears that many of them could return to stage attacks on home soil, something the Prime Minister has described as the biggest threat to national security. Amid wider legal and technical concerns, the government insists that it won't be seeking approval to take its fight against the Islamic State across the border and into Syria.
In the studio now to discuss this with us, Toby Cadman, international lawyer, and on Skype we're joined by Sabah Al-Mukhtar, President of the Arab Lawyers Association. Thank you very much for joining us. Toby, can I come to you first? Are we in the early stages of another Iraq war?
Well, I think we are. I don't think the vote is altogether surprising. I think we were heading towards this, and we can see that statements have been made by both Cameron and by other leaders. Ed Miliband has given a lot of support to this, and I think the concern that Daesh presents to the international community is something of grave concern, and so I'm not altogether surprised. What I am disappointed with is that there doesn't seem to be any long-term strategy, and I think that's what really needs to come.
Brother Sabah, can I bring you into this discussion? Toby just mentioned their long-term strategy. We saw an overwhelming number of politicians vote for yes to this. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think here we go again, 2003, when we had a policy which is based on myths, Now we have the threat to Europe by ISIS. It's actually threatening the Iraqis and the Syrians. This is the equivalent of the dodgy dossier of 2003. At the time, we were said that the region has invited us. Now we are invited by the government. Although Ed Miliband, when he referred to the Syrian regime, he seems to think it is illegitimate. I don't know how, but he thinks the Iraqi regime of Abadi is legitimate. And the third plank that we are relying on is that here we have the Arabs with us. We have the Jordanians, the Saudis, Qataris, and the rest of it. As if the foreign policy is dictated by how many Arabs we have on board. We seem to be wanting to join again the coalition of the willing when the Americans in 2003 brought Iceland and Senegal to liberate Kuwait as an exercise. So now they are talking about a coalition of 60 nations. I don't know what the hell they are talking about, but certainly this is not the way to deal with a problem from the air. This is a problem that needs political solution. These 6 bombers, I don't think they're going to make that much of a difference, but we want to have our name stuck with the coalition of the willing. And I thought parliamentarians would be looking at the British national interest rather than being on the list with the good and the nice guys in Europe, or indeed even with Monsieur Hollande in Paris. So I'm really saddened by this event. I don't think it'll make a difference, but I'm saddened by it.
Brother Sabah, you mentioned a coalition of 60 nations. Is the threat of IS being exaggerated, or how big is the actual threat?
Well, quite honestly, ISIS is a group of the heinous terrorists, but they are individuals. They are not an army. They are not a state. We had Bush in 1991 declared war on terror, which he didn't tell us what terror is or where it's addressed. He didn't tell us how long it's going to take. And now we're talking about war on ISIS, and I am willing to challenge anybody, David Cameron included, to actually say what is an ISIS. If the guy doesn't carry the black flag, how do you know he's an ISIS? Is it the black flag? Or is it the killing of 2 innocent people, as heinous as this crime is? But we did the same thing when 3,000 innocent people were slaughtered in 11 September 2001. And the reaction to these atrocities is not by being absolutely crazy, whereby now we're destroying the refineries of Syria. Believe it or not, these refineries are not only used by ISIS. The Syrians need them. The ordinary Syrian needs oil, needs fuel, need petrol, all the rest of it. The civilians that are being killed, how do you distinguish a civilian who is not an ISIS from a civilian who is an ISIS?
Thank you, Brother Sabah. I'll bring you back in. If I could just bring us back to Toby Cadman here in the studio. Toby, now we heard in our report about strategy and the contingency and the different elements that have been put into place and the conditions that David Cameron has put into place. What do we know about this, and how will this be taken forward?
Well, we don't know very much at this stage. I think, and our guest in Iraq, Sabah, has raised some very important issues, and that is that there is no real strategy. And I agree that a bombing campaign is not necessarily going to achieve what we're hearing it's intended to achieve, and I think that's one of the biggest concerns. And I agree that the situation caused in 2003 has created serious problems in Iraq. I myself was there just a few months ago and was able to speak to people in Erbil about what they're facing and the results of the 2003 campaign. And there is a very serious risk in not addressing the core problems, not addressing the situation that will affect many Iraqis and Syrians. I mean, we've spoken for a very long time about the threat that many of these groups, not just ISIS, but some of the other groups like Jabhat al-Nusra pose in Syria, and the Assad regime, the risk that poses to stability as well. So I think without actually having a strategy, a long-term strategy, then we do risk seeing much of the same again.
You mentioned the 2003 war. Now, if we look at this particular war now, there seems to be a lot more support. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's hard to say. I think that what we're looking at now is a group that poses a threat not just to Iraq and Syria. The nations that are coming out supporting it are concerned by the rise of extremism in their own states, but there are also states that are supporting it that are quite happy to use this as an opportunity. Egypt, for example, we're seeing Sisi being a member of the coalition of the willing, where we're seeing that the human rights situation in his own country, and so it's being used as an opportunity, and that again is quite disturbing.
Brother Sabah, can I bring you back in here? Toby just mentioned the different nations that are involved and why there's so much more support for this war than the war in 2003. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think, first of all, I think the media has played a very good role in really putting the people's mind that the threat is really here. It's going to be in London. And I agree that terrorism knows no boundaries. And I think the UK government has a duty toward all of us to protect the nation, to protect us, and to take all the necessary measures to protect that one. But that is different from, and this is where the mixing up is getting, and that is different from going to bomb some people somewhere. And incidentally, people in that region are asking, how come 15,000 Syrians were killed by the Syrian regime and it wasn't a threat? And now we have 3 journalists, or one journalist and 3 others, and probably a few more at risk, has suddenly made up this. So I think the people, generally speaking here, first of all, have been listening to the media. Secondly, they are being convinced that there is a threat, which is imminent threat, which I don't necessarily share. And thirdly, because the people they understand that what's happening is not really all that important. We have 6 airplanes, which is going to make some sorties, which doesn't add much to the French and the Syrians and the Saudis. And, the Saudis probably have a bigger force there, or the Qataris or whoever. So it's not going to be that dramatic. So I think people decided, well, one, it's a threat. Secondly, it's an easy action to take. Therefore, people accepted that fact.
Thank you, Brother Sabah. Toby, what will be the effect of these airstrikes? What are we anticipating to see?
Well, we will have to see the extent to which the UK contributes to the current process. We're hearing talk about targeted strikes. I think we just have to wait and see what the result is going to be. Of course, there has been this statement being made that there'll be nothing further at this stage, and so Cameron would have to go back to Parliament if he wants to extend that. And what they're looking at is small targeted strikes in the heartland of the Islamic State.
So can I ask you about the legality of these airstrikes? Now we're going into these airstrikes from Britain here. We've just had this vote. Now, what is allowed, what isn't? Where are we going to go to next?
Well, I think that's where you have to draw a distinction between targeted bombings in Iraq and targeted bombings in Syria. And David Cameron quite rightly said that there is a legal basis for going in because they have an invitation from the government of Iraq. Whether we consider it to be a legitimate government or not, it is the government of today. There is not that same ability to strike in Syria because we are not going to negotiate with the Assad regime because, as Sabah has rightly said, hundreds of thousands of Syrians have been killed by Assad's regime, and so there is no negotiation with the Assad regime. And so the question will have to be answered as to what legal basis there can be in order to target in Syria by means of self-defense, or whether this is a matter that will need to go to the Security Council. And just very quickly, we know that the problems with the Security Council is the Russian and Chinese veto, but we've already heard this morning Russia tentatively supporting the strikes in Iraq. Clearly they're not going to support the strikes in Syria, but we'll have to wait and see.
Very briefly, we've just had reports of resignation of Rushnara Ali, Member of Parliament, a shadow minister. Are we expecting to see more?
I think we will. There was a limited number that voted against or abstained, as we know. There was an overwhelming support for this. But I think that there will be individuals like Rushnara Ali that will resign. I don't think we're going to see the kind of fallout that we saw before, but there will be a lot of criticism expressed.
Thank you, Toby, and thank you, Brother Sabah. We will be following developments with the story, but moving on to other news, dozens of casualties have been reported after 5 days of fighting 300 kilometres southwest of Kabul as Taliban fighters storm a new district in Afghanistan. Flamina Jambalva brings us this and the rest of the day's news.